Good evening, class. Good evening, Professor Jim. For last week's forum post, I took my data set from the FBI's crime statistics in the United States for the years 1994 through 2013. I entered the data into Microsoft Excel for analysis. This data can be seen on the first table here. I focused more on the crime rate variables rather than the raw numbers. This is to eliminate the most obviously lurking variable in the observation, which is the total U.S. population, which grew every year from 1994 through 2013. One can easily assume that as population increases, the total number of crimes should increase, assuming that crime is equally likely. The crime rate was calculated to be the average number of occurrences of that specific crime per 100,000 people. These numbers are the numbers that are highlighted in red and green here. I will explain in a minute why these are highlighted red and green. For those of you who read my forum post from last week, I mentioned that I wanted to see when a crime rate decreased from one year to the next and when it increased. This is where the highlighting comes in. Any crime rate that was higher in that year than it was for the preceding year is highlighted in red, and any crime rate that was lower in that year than it was for the preceding year is highlighted in green. As you can see, there are clearly more green cells than red cells, suggesting that crime rates tended to decrease over time. Additionally, I calculated the number of times crime increased or decreased. It decreased 141 times, increased 28 times, and remained the same twice. I brought all of that relevant data into a lower table showing only the crime rates, and I included a column for the proportional change of that crime rate in a separate column. The crime rate change is presented in a decimal proportion value. For example, if you look at the murder rate change in 1995, it shows minus 0.089, which means that the murder rate dropped by 8.9% from 1994 to 1995. For my visual presentation of this data, I deleted the columns for violent crime and property crime rate. This is because aggravated assault, murder, rape, and robbery were all included under the blanket of violent crime, and burglary, larceny, and auto theft were all included under property crime. Including violent and property crime is therefore redundant for the purpose of this visual presentation. I also used Microsoft Excel to create my visual presentation because I was already using Excel for my calculations and analysis, and because Excel is just a fantastic and criminally underused program. I created two graphs. The first graph is a stacked bar graph of the individual crime rate by year, shown here. Each crime rate is color-coded and stacked on top of each other. So, for example, even though auto theft is at the highest, it does not mean that it was the greatest rate. The auto crime rate starts here and ends here. So the greatest crime rate for pretty much every year was larceny. I'm going to have to zoom in to show the red bars for murder because the murder crime rate was so low compared to all of the other crime rates, which is obviously a good thing. I'm going to attach my updated Excel spreadsheet to this forum post, and it will include this graph in case anyone wants to review it in greater detail. My second graph used the table of proportional change in crime rate. Again, I used a stacked bar graph, and I changed the color coding to allow the colors to stand out more since they shuffled around some based on whether they increased for the year or decreased. Here you can see, for example, that in 1995, larceny, which is coded in yellow increased from 1994 to 1995, whereas all the other crime rates decreased from 1994 to 1995. This graph will also be included in my attached spreadsheet in case you would like to review it in greater detail. Well, class, this will conclude my presentation. Thank you in advance for your responses and input, and have a great weekend.